one thing, if you read the Gospels, especially the Gospel of Luke, is you'll notice, and I've said this many times, I know Fred has said this many times, Jesus himself comes out and says, why is he here? For the purpose of proclaiming the good news to the poor. We've talked about this before. In the Greek, the word for good news is the same exact word for gospel. They are one and the same. In the New Testament, they are used interchangeably in many places. You'll read one translation and you'll see good news. And you'll read another translation and it might say gospel. When we read that we are called to spread the gospel, we should understand we are called to spread the good news. So, if we are called to spread the good news, shouldn't it sound like good news, right? That should be evangelism 101, right? Jesus says, go and proclaim the gospel. The gospel, the word for gospel is the same word as good news. Therefore, when we speak it, it should sound like good news. There we go, right? So, the holiday season being about the entering of Jesus into our world to bring about the gospel means that this month we should be speaking a lot of good news, right? As you read the Gospels, particularly Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what are called the synoptics, you will see one word or a phrase emerge whenever Jesus, well, not whenever, almost whenever Jesus is talking about the good news. That is the kingdom of heaven. In Matthew 3, John the Baptist is preparing the way for Jesus' coming. He says, get ready. The king is coming. You know what the very first words that come out of John the Baptist's mouth are? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Then when Jesus begins his ministry in the Gospel of Matthew as well, do you know what his very first words were after the temptation in Matthew chapter 4, verse 17? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And again, this is the gospel, this is not bad news, but this is good news. Yes. Jesus came for a purpose, in order to bring a message, and that message was the kingdom of heaven. And if the kingdom of heaven is the gospel, then it is good news, right? We can keep doing this over and over again. Jesus' ministry, as it says in chapter 4, verse 23, consisted of teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the gospel of the kingdom. So, if we were to read that literally, it says, preaching the good news of the kingdom. And healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So, what is the kingdom of heaven that it will be declared to be good? And would bring the Son of God himself out of the heavens in order to proclaim this as good. Well, let's turn to Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 1. And we read this, not this past Wednesday, but the week before. Yes, the week before we read this on Wednesday because we were doing an Advent study on Wednesday night, which you should all join us for. And Advent isn't so mysterious as we oftentimes make it, because Advent literally is the word for coming. So all it is a study on the coming of Jesus. Whenever you hear somebody talk about the Advent, that's what they're saying. Coming. Okay? Advent means coming. So Isaiah chapter 9, starting in verse 4, it says, but there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them has light shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest. For they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood, will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David, or over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. And if you ever want to remember what those last two verses were, just ask Judy, because she had to memorize it. So she had to memorize it at one point in time, so we'll go test her. I know she's not in here, but she can hear, so she's probably wishing that I didn't have you all go test her. But go test her on it and see if she still remembers and has that verse memorized. The kingdom of heaven is the restoration of everything back to the way it was supposed to be. It's not something new. It isn't some great new heavenly thing, but it is the restoration of what was once before, the thing that was lost. In the beginning of creation there was two people, right? Adam and Eve, thank you. Adam and Eve. There was perfection. There was peace, justice, righteousness. Now, what were the things just promised in Isaiah chapter 9? Something along the lines of peace, justice, and righteousness, right? A restoration. As we know, when sin entered the world, it created a chasm between us and our God. When we allowed darkness to enter where it was not meant to be, everything became corrupted. Everything became corrupted. Suffering entered our world. Justice became perverted, and righteousness an afterthought. Every bit of pain that we endure currently, every atrocity that we witness, committed, is a direct result of the brokenness of our world due to sin and its hold on our lives and the rest of creation. The curse of sin did not simply corrupt humanity, but it corrupted creation as well. A perfect creation that was without flaw, now you see tsunamis and typhoons and earthquakes. All these things have become prevalent amidst the groaning creation. Now, we're not saying hurricane, typhoon in the Philippines was because of their sinfulness. Nothing like that. What we're saying is, the way the world was created, there was no such thing as typhoons and earthquakes. But rather, sin corrupted more than just ourselves, right? There's no direct connection between I sinned and now the tornado knocked down my house. Okay? But there is a direct connection between we live in a broken world, and a broken world has short circuits every now and then, doesn't it? Maybe more than every now and then. The kingdom of heaven is the restoration of everything that is right and good. It is the abolition of oppression and suffering. The kingdom of heaven is verse 2. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them a light has shined. If we've ever come against any kind of controversy or depressing events, we know what it feels like to have darkness hovering over us, don't we? Right? And so we should be able to relate to this when Isaiah says, on them has light shined. This is what Jesus came proclaiming. The good news, and the reason that the gospel is good news, is that the time has come for everything to be set right again. We have been, and let's admit it, still are, dwelling in a deep darkness. But we are coming to the light. Joy has come on this day. That inescapable joy that eluded us for so long, eluded this world for so long, is returning. War will be no more. Will be. There will be only peace. No more pain, no more suffering. The kingdom of heaven is here. And it is coming. Everything is happening. It is not yet, but it is still here. Not fully revealed, but still we see a corner of it. Everything that you could possibly imagine being messed up. And if we just got done with Thanksgiving, right, and we all had our little diapers on the windshield, right, that we talked about last week, we know that there were a few things that were messed up, weren't there? Right? Maybe the turkey got burned, maybe it was a little too dry, maybe somebody showed up late, whatever that might be. Things didn't necessarily go according to plans. Everything that you can possibly imagine being messed up, the kingdom is the opposite. It is everything true and right. It is a just king, a just rule, a harvest of joy and righteousness. This is the kingdom of heaven. And this is why Jesus came to proclaim it as the gospel or good news. Thank you. That's why the kingdom of heaven is good news. Jesus didn't simply say the kingdom of heaven was at hand, but that it was here, right now. He said, look around you. Demons are being cast out, and the lame are being healed. The kingdom is upon you. But this obviously confuses us to some degree, because if the kingdom meant the correction of wrong and the redemption of justice, then why are things such a mess? Well, that's not an easy answer. And there are a lot of so-called solutions to the problem. But let's just stop here and let Jesus explain that a little bit. Turn over to Matthew chapter 13. And don't close after we read this, because we're going to jump in a few places in Matthew 13. Matthew 13, starting in verse 24. Matthew 13, starting in verse 24. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, no, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. And we're going to jump down a little bit there to verse 36. So we're skipping a few verses. To Jesus' explanation. He says, then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples came to him, saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. And the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the close of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the close of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, he who has ears, let him hear. And so we remember as we're reading that Jesus is proclaiming what? The gospel of the kingdom of heaven. And so that means this parable is what? Good news, right? So don't focus on, right? This is about the good news, okay? This is about, you're already stuck in the bad news. So let's get on to some good news to get out of the bad news, right? But how many times do we get stuck in the bad news on that one? Jesus says the kingdom might be compared to, and then tells us the parable of the weeds. God is not the only one at work here in this world, is he? We often underestimate sin, and we place it in the realm of a verb. We say, sin is an action. It is something that I do, and nothing more. But, according to Scripture, not just here but other places, sin is described not as a verb but a noun. It's a thing that is living and active, a force. that is fighting against us. It isn't just a matter of I have sinned, but I have been influenced by sin. Paul talks about the flesh and the spirit, right? It isn't something that we perform, but rather it's oftentimes something that performs us. Sin in itself is attempting to pull us away from the kingdom. If the gospel is good news, then what is sin? Bad news, right? Here in the parable of the weeds, we have Jesus who has planted the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven is good news. He has come to bring an end to the suffering of this world, to produce a good and a righteous crop full of joy and pleasure. But the enemy, the evil one, sin, has come in the night and refuses to go down without a fight. It's lost, it's dead, but in its final death throes, it's going to take as many as it can get. If I'm going to lose, you're going to lose with me. I'm taking you down too. That's what we're experiencing today. As we think of the kingdom of heaven, we need to think of the world in those terms. Sin has lost. Death has lost. The kingdom has come. But sin, death, evil is in the process of dying, right? It's in its final death throes, and what is it trying to do as it goes down? Take every one of us with it. As many as it can. So when we think of the kingdom of heaven, we shouldn't think, well, is the kingdom of heaven actually here? Yes, but it is not complete yet. Satan is defeated, sin is defeated, yes, but it is not gone yet. And it's going to take down and do as much damage as it can in the process. Jesus says, an enemy, sin, as we talk about, has cast the seeds of weeds among the good crop, among the kingdom. But if we uproot the evil now, it might also uproot the good. Think about that passage in 2 Peter where Peter says, God's not slow to act, but rather He is not willing to allow any to perish. So God's not going to pull up the weeds and be willing to take any of the good seed with it. Right? You don't throw away good seed. God doesn't simply end the world because then imagine all of His children that would be uprooted and destroyed because they haven't yet come to know Him. We haven't yet figured out what kind of seed they are. So it is here. The kingdom of heaven is present, but not complete. To bring about the completeness of the kingdom of heaven would bring about the loss of the very thing that Christ came for. And so, suffering continues. The pain remains. Justice has not yet come to eradicate oppression. But the kingdom is coming. The day of harvest will arrive. And then there will be no more weeds, no more poverty. Or, you notice how there's something we skipped over in Matthew 13, right? I told you not to close. I hope you didn't. Looking back at Matthew 13, verse 31. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour, till it was all leavened. The kingdom of heaven is here. It might be small. You might have a hard time identifying it or even seeing it. But every day it grows larger. It takes time for it to grow, but when it does, it will be great and massive, so that it cannot be contained. When Jesus came, He brought that tiny little seed and He planted it. When we think about Christmas, and we think about the Advent, the coming, this is what has happened. The mustard seed has been planted. But you don't just stick a mustard seed in the ground and suddenly have a mustard plant, a tree, do you? It takes time. And so when we think about, as Jesus describes that period between the coming of Jesus and the second coming, That's what we need to picture. We need to picture the coming of Jesus as the planting of that seed. Right? And the second coming as the full maturation of that seed into a whole tree. So the planting of the seed, even though many of us might not be able to ever experience the shade of that tree, is still good news, isn't it? So Jesus sent out his disciples. They watered it, it grew. Then there were more disciples, and more and more. The kingdom is ever expanding and growing larger and larger with every day. The day of the harvest is coming, but until that day gets here, the kingdom will continue to grow. That is what Jesus came to proclaim. The beginning of redemption. The start of the process of reconciliation of creation to God. And just as Jesus said over and over again in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, blessed are the poor, whether that be in literal money, spirituality, or whatever, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They are the ones that Jesus came for. The ones who have been victimized by the sin of this world. For them, the kingdom of heaven has come. And who has ever been victimized by the sin of this world? It's okay, we can all raise our hands. Right? For them, for us, has the kingdom of heaven come. Jesus came to bring the gospel, the good news. That news is that our pain and suffering has not gone unnoticed. God doesn't stand by uncaring, but God has acted and is still acting. He's not done. Redemption is coming. The comfort and rest that have been proclaimed is growing. God has redeemed us. There's no reason to lose hope, no purpose in giving up. We only need to hold on a little longer and all will be well. There is hope. There is good news, the gospel. God has heard our cries, and He is fixing it even now. We know that one day there will be no more tears. One day there will be no more pain. One day there will be no more suffering. The day of rest is coming. The kingdom of heaven is at hand.